This is a new program if you've just arisen and find your TV set working instead of a test pattern, called Today from the NBC Communications Center in Radio City, New York, from the RCA exhibition.
That, of course, is Dave Garroway, the first captain who guided us on this sentimental journey, introducing America to this program exactly 50 years ago today, January the 14th, 1952. And welcome back, everyone, to this very special golden anniversary edition of Today, Monday, January the 14th. The year now, of course, is 2002. I'm Katie Couric, along with Matt. Right now, we're standing on a replica of the original set that was used 50 years ago. This is what Dave Garroway's desk looked like, although the studio was a bit larger in those days. This is a smaller version. And talk about technology. Right around my neck is the microphone that Dave Garroway, or a similar microphone that Dave Garroway would use 50 years ago. Looks like some kind of surgical device or something you might find at the dentist's office. It's a little cumbersome, to say the least.
There's the ones we use these days. We've come a long way, baby, again. By the way, speaking of technology, take a look. They were very proud of the fact back in 1952 that through something called telefax, they could get West Coast newspapers here on the East Coast. You're looking at one right there. That's an East Coast paper. Plane hits New York River, saved 36. That was in most of the East Coast papers that morning. If you look up, Barry, there's a West Coast paper. The worst storm in 62 years hit San Francisco. Apparently a major rainstorm, and they were very proud of the fact that they could show you that at 7 o'clock in the morning here on the East Coast.
That's how they brought everyone the news of the world. As soon as the show went on the air, needless to say, viewers started to come to the window to get a first-hand peek, to wave, to hold signs, to wish their loved ones a happy birthday. There they are. They came in droves, and of course, they're doing the same thing today, and we can show you our visitors in color.
We should also tell you this isn't exactly where Dave Garroway's studio was. We're in the NBC Experience, the store across from Studio 1A right now. The original studio was just across the street from us here, just down the block from where we are now in Studio 1A. Christie's Auction House occupies that space today in New York City, but that's where Dave Garroway was 50 years ago right now.
You really do get a sense of what Dave Garroway experienced with all the faces in the crowd sort of staring at you like you're an animal in the zoo.
And
Hi.
By the way, this exhibit's going to stay up, and actually fans of the show can come by the NBC Experience and sit down and see what it must have felt like 50 years ago.
Do a little time travel of their own.
Exactly. Coming up in this half hour, we're going to meet some guests. They were part of the very first broadcast of Today 52 years ago, a family having to do with the Korean War. We'll find out what they've been up to in 50 years and what their memories of that broadcast are in just a few minutes.
And Ken Burns will join us. He, of course, is known for his meticulously detailed and award-winning documentaries covering things like the Civil War and baseball, among others. So we asked the man with an eye for history to turn his camera on us as we celebrate the Big 5-0. We'll see Ken's finished product in just a few minutes. But first, let's get the top news stories of the morning from Ann Curry across the street and over at the news desk. Ann, good morning again.
Good morning again, Katie. And Matt, good morning once again, everybody. In the news, some important news to get to. This morning, a White House spokesman said President Bush is fine and is proceeding on a two-day Midwest swing today, despite a fainting spell on Sunday. Doctors say the president choked on a pretzel while watching a football game. His heart rate decreased temporarily, and he fell off a couch, bruising his face. He was alone at the time and says he came to just a few seconds later. Thomas Junta faces up to 20 years in prison after being found guilty of involuntary manslaughter last Friday in the beating death of another father at their son's hockey practice. This morning, I asked prosecutor Martha Coakley what message the verdict sends.
When the incident first occurred, it was a clear wake-up call to everybody that whatever was happening in children's sports was going a little bit too far. Clearly, now that the jury has held Thomas Junta accountable for that killing, my hope is that people will take this into account and frankly, that we won't see another parent on an autopsy table.
Sentencing for Thomas Junta is set for a week from this Friday. Singer Rosemary Clooney is recovering at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota today after undergoing successful lung cancer surgery. The 73-year-old Clooney had part of one lung removed. Her agent says she is doing very well. And 10 Boy Scouts and their 2 adult leaders are safe and sound today after they got stranded over the weekend in the woods north of Orlando. They underestimated how long a canoe trip would take and had to camp overnight in the cold and the rain with no food, tent, sleeping bags, or warm clothing. Rescuers found them the next day, chilly but unhurt. It is now 8:05 and time for today's weather. And now.
Today's weather is brought to you by America's Egg Farmers and the incredible edible egg.
And good morning, everybody. A lovely morning here. And you obviously were too young when the show first started, I'm sure. What's your name?
My name's Jeremy.
Where are you from?
Arkansas.
Having a good time?
Pretty much, yes.
Pretty much, yes. Well, of course, pretty much, yes. Let's take a look and show you what's going on as far as our weather is concerned, and you'll see that we are looking for windy conditions in the plains, anywhere from 3 to 6 inches of snow in the central Great Lakes, fog in central California, look for some snow interior New York State, and a lot of wet weather in the Gulf Coast on into the southeastern Atlantic states. That's what's going on around the country. Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods. Second 50 years, we got another group of stars starting to get ready to watch the show. All right, let's head back inside the map.
All right, Al, thank you very much. Right now, we're worried about our troops over in Afghanistan. Well, 50 years ago, American soldiers were halfway around the world fighting another battle. Let's take a look at how it was handled on Today back in 1952.
I'd like to tell you just a little bit about what you're going to see on Today in the next half hour. I'd like to tell you, first of all, that you're going to get records and the time with your morning coffee. And you're going to have a visit with a family here in New York who will be looking at their son in Korea. That's all coming up in your way in the next half hour. Now here's Dave Garroway.
Now, those guests he referred to were the first ever to appear on the Today Show. A few days before that first broadcast, a family here in New York spoke to their son, a soldier in Korea, by phone. An NBC cameraman in Seoul recorded it on film and sent it back to the U.S.
Hello, Mom.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
When are you coming home?
I'll be home soon, Mom. Don't worry about it.
Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine, Mom.
The family then came to our studio to watch the film of that call alongside Dave Garroway. The young soldier from that film, his brother, and one of his sisters, whom you heard on that tape, are back here again live in the studio after 50 years. Mickey and Bill Sinnott, Marge, all good morning. Nice to see you all.
Good morning.
You've already got tears in your eyes. We just started. Mickey is a nickname, correct?
Yes.
Your real name's Daniel, which meant we had a little trouble tracking you down over the last several months.
Yes, you're looking for Mickey Sinnott. And what happened, you got a hold of my sister-in-law, and she says, well, my uncle, we have a Mickey. And then my sister-in-law called me, and she said, I think it's a phony call or something. It sounds like a hoax. And she says, but if you want to follow it up, so I says, oh, no, that's me. I said, I know what they're talking about.
You were fighting in Korea,
yes.
Had been on the front lines. They came and got you and said, look, you're going to be part of a television show. You didn't know much more than that, did you?
No. I was on the front lines, and we were up there for about 8 days. I didn't bathe or anything, and they just said, come on, you got to go back to Seoul. So when I got back to headquarters platoon, the first sergeant looked at me, he said, well, you got to put some stripes on you, he says. So with safety pins, they put the sergeant stripes on.
Gave you a shave and a shower?
No.
No?
No, I went back, I had to hop in the Jeep, and I went back to Seoul, and we asked the MP for directions to the general's headquarters, and he looked at me, and he says, what the heck is going on here? So I said, I have to go to the general's headquarters. He says, you better shape up. You got 24 hours.
Marge, what do you remember about your family heading to the television studio that day to take the call from your brother?
Oh, it was like, my mother was very excited. We didn't think we would talk to him for a long time. And I guess they sent us a telegram because nobody had a phone or a TV at the time. And it was very, very exciting.
Bill, you were, about a year and a half old at the time, so you don't remember much about the actual day. But what has your family told you? What stories did you hear about this event as you were growing up?
That we were on TV, long time ago.
Famous in the neighborhood?
Yeah. So I took it like everyone else with a grain of salt, like, yeah, sure, we were on TV.
Mickey, when you listened to the call, your mom and dad were very emotional people. Yeah. Your mom was obviously crying. She was so worried about you. Your dad broke up as well because he was concerned, and he said, son, when you come back, we're going to go on a fishing trip. And I know it was hard for you to listen to that in Seoul as well.
Yeah. Yes. It broke me up too, but when I did get home, we did go fishing. And it was we had a good time.
Your folks passed away?
Yeah.
along with some of your siblings as well over these years. The tape of that, or the film of that day, was lost. Is that right?
Yes. We had the film of me in Korea, and it was 16 millimeter. And when Stephanie, the producer, when I got in touch with her, I says, we have the film, and she says, oh, that's great.
Marge, what would it mean to your parents to know that 50 years after that date, the three of you are sitting back on live television?
My mother would have been so proud of all of us. And she really, that was one thing in her life that you did for her. You really made her feel wonderful. It was really a wonderful, wonderful thing you did for her. She just, you know, to see your son, and she had two boys. She had one in the Navy and one in the and it was, Dave Garraway was just the most wonderful person in the world to us that day that I remember.
Well, we want to thank you all for coming. We're happy you made it back from Korea safely, and
yes,
we're awfully happy that you joined us again 50 years after the date.
And you know, you had 5 people that were supposed to be on, and 3 died before the show. Yeah.
Well, Mickey, Marge, Bill, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Happy anniversary to you as well. It's 11 past the hour. Up next, Ken Burns looks back at 50 years of today, right after this.
Today's 50th anniversary moment is brought to you by Royal Caribbean. Get out there and take a Royal Caribbean vacation.
Mark Twain once said, man is the only animal that blushes or needs to. He's the subject of the latest Ken Burns documentary that airs tonight and tomorrow on PBS. If Mr. Twain were here on this occasion, he would no doubt be delivering his wry observations about our fair program. But since that's not possible, we asked his current alter ego to reflect on today's past and present. Ken Burns, good morning.
Good morning. I'm so grateful you've asked me to help celebrate 50 years of the Today Show. And with the help of Today producer Andre Poulin and editor Gary Simmons, I've made this Valentine for you all. I'm just a year and a half younger than the show itself, so I can't remember a time when it wasn't a part of my life, marking time over the past tumultuous half-century. Anniversaries are hugely important, but in view of what happened to our nation on September 11th, the most important event in American history in the last 50 years, I felt the only way I could do this piece and celebrate the show's glorious past was to roll back time a few months, and if only for a moment or two, undo the damage of that terrible day.
This is Today. NBC begins a new program called Today, and if it doesn't sound too revolutionary, I really believe begins a new kind of television.
It's a very special show, and I really think that people feel both privileged and honored to be associated with this program. I also think they feel an enormous amount of responsibility. And I think one of the reasons they feel so honored is because of the show's incredibly rich history.
There was this window on the world beginning at 7 o'clock in the morning with this most engaging man called David Garraway. And I have this fixed memory of coming down, racing off to school in the morning with my mother ironing something or fixing breakfast before she went to work, and the two of us would watch the Today Show. It was magic to me.
Jane Pauley, the newest addition to the Today family, has a chance now to say a few words of her own about...
I'd wake up more years than I would admit, put my feet on the floor, be conscious of the fact that I was now going to do the Today Show, and shudder in disbelief at, by the time I left home, I was fine and confident, but the Today Show was so large.
I remember as a viewer, not as a member of the team, when I would turn on the set at 7:50 and count down that last 60 seconds and I'd hear, "Good morning," I'd know everything was okay.
When Jane Pauley and I were doing it together, we had to form our family. She was a young, attractive, single woman from Chicago, had never been on the network before. I had been doing something else altogether differently. I was a hard news correspondent at the White House. So it took us a little while to find our rhythm as a family. But then it worked best when we did that.
I love what I'm doing, but to be part of an ensemble like that, especially when it's really clicking, is just unbeatable.
This is Today with Katie Couric and Matt Lauer.
That's your version.
I felt a little like a stepchild. I felt like, why do I deserve to be in this great family? I've grown to feel much more a part of the family, and it truly gets better as we share in each other's lives throughout the year.
I think the Today Show really is a constant in a constantly changing world, and it's just an opportunity for Americans who watch to get a glimpse of the world around them.
There is a late development in the attempted assassination of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat.
I was on the morning. We got word that Sadat had been shot at and then had been killed.
Several shots rang out.
I was on the morning that the Pope was almost killed. But then I was on for other joyous occasions.
We can see Anita Hill testifying.
I do.
And all of a sudden, we can talk about sexual harassment in a very real way.
Matthew was the type of person.
We can look
that
at
if this had happened to
how
another person,
gays in America are treated when we talk about the brutal murder of Matthew Shepard.
The events that have the most impact for me are the events that unfold while we're on the air. The earthquake, elements of the war in the Persian Gulf, of course, September 11th.
There's a lot of frivolity and levity on the show, and I think that those are major components of what makes the show a success.
The hours are the worst part of the job. I mean, everybody who's ever sat in this chair will tell you, you never get used to waking up at 4 in the morning.
The worst part is that every day, as I described it, you take your oral exams in front of the entire audience on whatever has happened in the last 24 hours in the news and the popular culture. On the other hand, look, I fixed a Christmas dinner with Julia Child and drank a half a bottle of wine with her. That was one of the great times of my life.
Leaving. It was. Leaving was the worst part.
We've laughed a lot on this show. We've cried a lot on this show. I think we've thought a lot on this show. And I think the fact that we do run the emotional gamut makes it very fulfilling, not only for us, but for the viewer, too. It's the 11th day of September, the year 2001, on a beautiful early fall morning here in Manhattan. If only you could turn back the clock.
Oh, it would be so great, too, just for a second and have it undone.
Well, Ken Burns, thank you so much for doing that for us. And it was a Valentine. And helped us look back and remember and understand even more why we love this job so much.
Thank you. Well, that's not it. I've got another 20 hours and 10 parts. I know we have time to fit it
in.
Honey,
save it for PBS. Thanks, Ken. We'll be back with more of this special Golden Anniversary edition of Today right after these messages.